One sister is everywhere. Television screens, Instagram posts, press conferences, weekly public appeals, $1 million reward, 6 videos in 31 days, grief broadcast to millions. The other sister is nowhere. 22 consecutive days of complete public silence. No press conferences, no direct appeals, no camera appearances. And her husband, the last person to see their mother alive, has never once, in over 40 days, publicly demanded the return of the vehicle investigators seized and placed into evidence. 2 sisters, 1 mother missing. And the silence of one is what a 30-year FBI veteran walked away talking about after watching every video the other one made. That contrast is where tonight begins. This video walks you through 7 verified, sourced, on-the-record details in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. And not speculation, not social media theory. 7 details, confirmed by FBI agents, former CIA operatives, forensic experts, and in one critical case, by the sheriff's own contradicting statements, made 14 days apart at 2 separate press podiums. The thread connecting all 7 of them runs directly through Annie Guthrie and her husband, Tommaso Cioni, the man who drove Nancy home the night she vanished, the last known person to see her alive, and the man whose vehicle, according to multiple law enforcement sources, investigators held in evidence for over 30 days while the sheriff publicly told the press it had already been processed and returned. Savannah Guthrie knows all of this. She has known it since the morning of February 1st, 2026. Every video she made, every carefully worded public statement, and every Instagram post was filmed through the lens of that knowledge. She knows who drove her mother home. She knows what the FBI found when they searched her sister's house. Twice, in 4 days. She knows the car sat in that evidence lot. She knows what the profiler said on national television, and she has stood in front of a camera 6 times and said nothing about any of it. That silence, stacked on top of Annie's silence, is the foundation every other detail tonight is built on. But first, you need to know who Nancy Guthrie is, because she is not a headline. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives alone in a brick house set into the Catalina foothills, a quiet, upscale residential neighborhood on the north side of Tucson, Arizona. The kind of neighborhood where residents know each other by name, where garage doors close at reasonable hours, where the loudest thing most people hear at night is the desert wind. Nancy is a woman of deep faith, sharp wit, a laugh her family says carries through walls. She raised her children in a home where Sunday mornings meant church without exception, where dinner was a deliberate ritual. She has limited mobility. She wears a cardiac pacemaker. She takes daily prescription medication that, if missed, carries serious and escalating medical consequences. She is also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, a woman whose face appears in millions of American homes every single morning. Investigators would later note that the famous daughter may not have been incidental to why this house was targeted. It may have been the reason. Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Nancy spends the evening at Annie's house, approximately 4 miles from her own home in the Catalina foothills. A family dinner, routine on the surface. She arrived by rideshare. She did not leave by 1. At 9:48 p.m., per the Pima County Sheriff's Department's confirmed timeline, Tommaso Cioni, Annie's husband, Savannah's brother-in-law, pulls into Nancy's driveway. He waits until she is inside. The garage door descends at exactly 9:50 p.m. His headlights sweep across the quiet street and disappear into the dark. Nancy Guthrie is alone inside that brick house, That is the last verified, documented moment anyone can place her there alive. Now here is where the investigative lens narrows directly onto Tommaso Cioni, and it narrows there for specific, documented reasons. Sitting in that driveway at 9:50 p.m., Tommaso held a precise inventory of knowledge. He knew the interior layout of that house intimately. He had been inside it on countless occasions. He knew the exact positions of the security cameras. He knew Nancy's mobility limitations. He knew about her cardiac monitoring device. He knew her daily medication schedule. And he knew the specific window of hours that would pass before anyone would attempt to contact her again. Knowing these things does not make someone guilty. Every person close to Nancy held some version of this information. Proximity creates knowledge. But in every federal investigation, from a small county sheriff's department to the FBI's most specialized units, the last person to see the victim is the first thread pulled, the first question asked. And in this case, that starting point has a name: Tommaso Cioni. And that answer has not changed in over 40 days of active federal investigation. 4 hours pass. The neighborhood is dark and still. And then, in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, the doorbell camera on Nancy's front porch captures movement. A figure steps into frame. Black mustache. Average build, investigators would later confirm a height of approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches. An Ozark Trail 25-liter hiking backpack worn over both shoulders. Gloves. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed publicly what the footage showed. The individual was armed. He moves through the dark with a measured, deliberate calm that forensic behavioral analysts would later describe as inconsistent with impulsive or opportunistic conduct. He does not look up at the camera the way a stranger would, and he does not hesitate at the door the way someone unfamiliar with this property would. He reaches the camera, and he physically disconnects it. The sheriff's department confirmed the camera affixed to Nancy's door was manually tampered with and disabled that morning. A tech company was later brought in to perform the difficult forensic task of recovering the footage, and against considerable odds, they succeeded. He moves like someone who has been there before, because, as CNN sources citing investigators with direct case knowledge confirmed, he had. The masked individual visited Nancy Guthrie's property on at least one prior separate occasion, confirmed by earlier footage showing the same individual on a different date, without the backpack, moving along the same approach path. This was not improvisation, and this was a planned operation with at least one documented reconnaissance visit before the night of January 31st. Now, here is the forensic detail that confirms the full scope of that planning. The ring cameras across the surrounding neighborhood, devices mounted on fences, garage exteriors, back porches, cameras that collectively should have recorded a comprehensive visual record across multiple properties throughout that entire night, went dark. Neighbors checked their footage on the morning of February 1st and found the same result repeated across multiple properties. Not available. A dead window. A blind spot covering the precise hours of the disappearance. When investigators returned to the neighborhood in the days that followed, they asked residents a targeted question. Did you experience any internet disruptions the night of January 31st? Multiple neighbors confirmed it. Forensic experts consulted by NBC News were direct. Producing that kind of coordinated outage across multiple properties, reaching the backs of lots with outbuildings and fencing, would require a professional-grade Wi-Fi signal-disrupting device. Equipment that requires deliberate sourcing, technical knowledge, and advanced preparation. This was engineered. Someone mapped this neighborhood's camera network before January 31st and disabled it with precision. Someone did not just take Nancy Guthrie. Someone built a plan to take Nancy Guthrie. If you are new to this channel, this is exactly what we do every week. We go past the press conference statements and into the verified forensic record. Cases where the official timeline and the investigative evidence are not telling the same story. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what is coming in the chapters ahead, specifically what the FBI's forensic extraction team pulled from Annie and Tommaso's home on the night of February 7th, changes the entire shape of this case. Do not miss it. Around 2:30 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker sent its last signal to her iPhone. That detail was confirmed by Fox News Digital, cross-referenced against the Pima County Sheriff's investigative timeline. The device went silent in the early morning hours. Investigators logged it. It became a fixed anchor point in a minute-by-minute timeline that by sunrise had already set federal resources in motion. By late morning on Sunday, February 1st, Nancy had missed her scheduled church service livestream. She never missed it. A member of her church contacted the family. Relatives drove to the house around 11 a.m. They searched the home and the surrounding property. No sign of her. Around noon, the family called 911. Deputies responding to the residence noted her personal belongings, her phone, her essential items, were still inside. The conditions at the property were described by investigators as very concerning and inconsistent with a voluntary departure. And what forensic processing of the scene confirmed was unambiguous. Blood drops were recovered on Nancy's front porch and confirmed by law enforcement as belonging to Nancy Guthrie. She did not leave that house on her own. By February 2nd, 2026, the Pima County Sheriff's Department publicly announced the case had shifted from a missing persons search to a criminal investigation. Federal resources were already deployed, and the quiet Catalina foothills neighborhood that had been so still on the night of January 31st was now the center of an active federal investigation, with agents on the street, news vans at the perimeter, and one name at the center of every investigative thread. A driveway, a garage door, 9:50 p.m., and the man who sat there watched it close and drove away. The masked figure on that doorbell camera is one piece of this. The engineered blackout is another. But neither detail explains what a 30-year FBI behavioral analyst concluded after watching 6 videos of a grieving daughter. And neither explains why. Through all of Savannah's public appearances and all of Annie's silence, not one public word was said about getting Tommaso's car back from the evidence lot. 7 details are coming, all verified, all on the record. And by the time the 7th one lands, the question that Profiler asked on national television will not feel like speculation. It will feel like the only place a 40-day evidence trail could possibly lead. The garage door closed at 9:30 p.m. on Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Tommaso Cioni drove away into the dark. And for the next 4 hours and 17 minutes, nothing on any accessible camera captured a single verifiable moment of what was happening inside that brick house in the Catalina foothills. Then, at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie's Google Nest doorbell camera registered movement at the front door. And then it went dark. Not a battery failure, not a system error. Someone disconnected it. Physically. By hand. Deliberately. That disconnection is the starting point of everything investigators would spend the next 40 days trying to reconstruct. The footage from that camera should not exist. Nancy did not have an active cloud subscription for her Nest system. Without cloud backup, footage is gone the moment a device is powered down. But the FBI, working alongside Google's technical teams, spent 11 days digging into back-end server architecture. Residual data cached in systems that most users never know exist. And they found something. 6 still photographs and 3 short video clips recovered from infrastructure that the suspect almost certainly did not account for. FBI Director Kash Patel announced the recovery publicly on February 12, 2026. 11 days of forensic effort to retrieve footage from a camera someone was certain they had permanently silenced. What that footage showed gave investigators their first hard look at the person they were hunting. A male figure approaches Nancy's front door in dark clothing, black gloves, and sneakers. A ski mask covers his face, black fabric with openings cut for the eyes and mouth, appearing slightly lighter in the infrared capture of the Nest camera lens. On his back, a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. That backpack is sold exclusively at Walmart. The FBI flagged it immediately as one of the most significant physical leads in the case. His build is average. Forensic video analysis placed his height between 5 feet 9 and 5 feet 10 inches. And he moves toward the camera with the kind of deliberate, unhurried pace that behavioral analysts later described as inconsistent with impulsive conduct. He reaches into the front yard, pulls out a piece of vegetation, and uses it to physically cover the camera lens before disconnecting the device entirely. Methodical, sequential, every step pre-planned. And something else is visible in that footage. An object in the suspect's front pocket. Former law enforcement analysts examining the footage described it as resembling either a handheld radio or a signal-disrupting device. That detail would become one of the most debated forensic questions in the entire investigation. Because when FBI investigators returned to the surrounding neighborhood in the days that followed, they went door to door with one specific question. Did you notice any disruptions to your internet connection on the night of January 31st? The answers were consistent. Multiple neighbors confirmed connectivity issues during the overnight hours. One neighbor told investigators that his Ring camera showed a gap in its recording history during the precise window corresponding with Nancy's disappearance, marked simply as not available. That camera was the one with the closest sightline to Nancy's property, positioned to capture her backyard through a fence line. That pattern of missing footage triggered a forensic theory that moved quickly through both the investigative community and the national press. A Wi-Fi signal disrupting device, illegal under Federal Communications Commission regulations, could, if positioned close enough to a router, flood local radio frequencies and prevent connected cameras from transmitting or recording. Investigators confirmed they were examining the possibility. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos stated publicly that his department was looking at every angle of the surveillance gap. A damaged utility box located around the corner from Nancy's home was also identified by the sheriff's department as part of the active investigation. Physical infrastructure damage consistent with an external attempt to interfere with local connectivity. But forensic experts were not unified on the theory. Morgan Wright, a cybersecurity and law enforcement analyst, told Fox News Digital that a commercially available signal-disrupting device typically has an effective range of only 10 to 30 yards, and that causing outages across multiple neighboring properties would require significantly more powerful equipment operating at a far higher capacity. Wright raised a pointed counter-argument. The footage recovered from Nancy's own Nest camera appeared clear and intact, not distorted. An active signal-disrupting device positioned at her front door at the moment of recording would most likely have degraded or eliminated that footage entirely. Retired Detective Lisa Miller assessed the object visible in the suspect's pocket as more consistent with a handheld radio than a disrupting device, raising the question of whether the suspect used it to communicate with a second individual operating elsewhere during the same window. That word, a second individual, has been quietly present in the investigative conversation since the first week of the case. What is not in dispute is this: the masked figure on Nancy's porch did not arrive without preparation. CNN sources citing investigators with direct knowledge of the case confirmed he had visited the property on at least one prior occasion. A separate date, earlier footage, no backpack, same approach path to the door. Physical reconnaissance, a deliberate dry run conducted before the night he chose to act. And Walmart, in responding to a request from the Sheriff's Department, provided investigators with purchase records for Ozark Trail hiker packs sold across its retail network in the preceding months. Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that surveillance footage from local Walmart locations was being reviewed as part of the lead. The backpack, he stated, was one of the most promising physical threads in the investigation. Now, sit with the full picture this chapter has assembled. A masked individual arrives at an 84-year-old woman's door in the middle of the night. He has been to that property before. He knows where the camera is. He comes prepared with vegetation to cover the lens before he disconnects it. He may have had a device in his pocket capable of interfering with local connectivity. A utility box around the corner is damaged. Neighborhood cameras show gaps in their recording history during the same window. The FBI spent 11 days recovering footage from a back-end server that the suspect almost certainly believed no longer existed. And what they pulled from that server shows someone who planned for every obstacle in advance. This was not opportunistic. This was an operation. And the question investigators have been working toward since the first hours of February 1st is not only who this person is, it is who gave him the information he needed to plan it. Who knew this neighborhood well enough to map its camera network? Who knew this woman's schedule well enough to time this down to the hour? Who knew this property well enough to walk straight to the door without hesitation? That question does not point toward a stranger, and it never has. Every investigation begins with the same first question. Not the most complicated one. Not the most sophisticated one. The simplest one. Who was the last person to see the victim alive? It is not an accusation. It is a procedure. It is the first thread pulled in every missing persons case, from the smallest county sheriff's department to the most specialized units inside the FBI. And in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, that question has had the same answer since the morning of February 1st, 2026. Tommaso Cioni, Annie Guthrie's husband, Savannah's brother-in-law, a 6th grade science and biology teacher at Basis Oro Valley School in Tucson, a man who, by every public account, was nothing more than a devoted son-in-law who drove his wife's elderly mother home after a family dinner. That answer has not changed once, not in over 40 days of active federal investigation, and yet his car sat in an evidence lot for over 40 days. Here is the verified sequence. Nancy arrived at Annie and Tommaso's home by Uber at approximately 5:32 p.m. on Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Dinner, family time. Ordinary on the surface. At approximately 9:45 p.m., Tommaso drove Nancy home in his blue Honda CR-V, a roughly 10-minute drive through the quiet Catalina foothills. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed to the New York Times that Tommaso ensured Nancy was safely inside her home before he left. The garage door descended at 9:30 p.m. Tommaso drove away, and that was it. That was the last documented, verified human interaction Nancy Guthrie had before she was taken from her home in the early morning hours of February 1st. Now here is what Tommaso knew in that moment. He's sitting in that driveway, watching that garage door close. He knew the interior layout of that home. He had been inside it on countless occasions. He knew the exact positions of the security cameras. He knew Nancy's mobility limitations. He knew about her cardiac monitoring device. He knew her medication schedule. He knew the precise window of hours that would pass before anyone would check on her again. Knowing these things does not make someone guilty. Every person close to Nancy held some version of that information. But in the forensic architecture of any investigation, the last person to see the victim occupies a position that no one else does. They were there when everyone else was not. They carry information that no one else has. And in this case, that position belongs to Tommaso Cioni alone. On February 3, 2026, our journalist Ashley Banfield reported on her podcast, Drop Dead Serious, citing a law enforcement source she described as highly regarded with direct knowledge of the investigation, that Tommaso Cioni had been identified by investigators as the central figure of interest in the case. The report moved immediately through national media. Sheriff Chris Nanos responded the same day, stating that investigators had not identified a suspect or person of interest. He pushed back on the Banfield report directly and emphatically. Savannah Guthrie, according to Megyn Kelly's reporting, was described as livid. According to multiple sources, she categorically does not suspect her brother-in-law and views the public speculation around him as damaging and reckless. That is Savannah's stated position. Hold it in your mind. And because what the investigative record shows is a separate and distinct track running parallel to those public statements. The blue Honda CR-V that Tommaso used to drive Nancy home on the night of January 31st was seized by the Pima County Sheriff's Department and placed into evidence. The vehicle was impounded to collect forensic material, fingerprints, DNA, and electronic data. Modern vehicles record significantly more than most people realize. Speed logs, location timestamps, door sensor activity, time-stamped data tied to every system the vehicle operates. Investigators confirmed the car was taken in for exhaustive processing. It was later confirmed to be at an auto mechanic under the custody of the Sheriff's Department, being physically reassembled after the forensic examination had concluded. On February 16, 2026, Sheriff Nanos stood at a press podium and used the phrase "processed vehicles" in the past tense. Done. Finished. Returned. 10 days later, on February 26th, CBS 5 reporter Brianna Whitney asked the Sheriff's Department directly about the status of the car. The response was unambiguous. All we can say at this time is the vehicle is still part of the investigation. Cleared in the past tense on day 16. Car confirmed still in evidence on day 27. The Sheriff's Department never explained that contradiction. Not in any subsequent press conference. Not in any issued statement. On February 27th, former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell appeared on The Megyn Kelly Show and made a direct assessment. You only retain a vehicle in evidence if it carries value for a potential trial. So you do not hold a family member's car for over a month on procedure alone. Then James Fitzgerald, the retired FBI behavioral analyst and Unabomber profiler, said something that has not left the national conversation since. His words were precise. If I was completely innocent, I would hire a lawyer by now and say, "I want my car back." Tommaso never made that demand publicly. Annie never made it publicly. And the car, as of March 11, 2026, was confirmed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department to still be in law enforcement custody, described as in the process of being released, with no confirmed timeline for when that would actually happen. Now, place that alongside this. Luke Daly, the man the FBI raided on February 13, 2026, with a full tactical response. Vehicles, agents in full operational gear, a federal-level operation, had his vehicle returned in approximately 2 weeks. Same investigation, same sheriff's department, same case. The man who received the most dramatic law enforcement response in the entire investigation got his car back faster than the family the sheriff publicly described as cleared. No one in law enforcement has explained that discrepancy. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments right now. Your city, your country, what time it is there. And tell me while you are there, does the car timeline sit right with you? Because the sheriff said, processed in the past tense, while that vehicle was still sitting in the custody of his own department. The comments are open. Every single one gets read. Savannah Guthrie is living in Tucson right now. She sees Annie regularly. She knows whether that car has come back. She knows exactly how long it has been gone. She knows what Fitzgerald said on national television about what it means to not demand your vehicle back. She has stood in front of a camera every week since February 1st and has not addressed a single one of those details publicly. That silence from both sisters is not invisible. And the profiler who noticed it is the same man who spent 30 years reading what people choose not to say. What is coming next is the evidence that the FBI extracted from inside Annie and Tommaso's home twice in the space of 4 days. And what they brought with them on the second visit changes the weight of everything this chapter just established. February 4th, 2026. 3 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished from her brick house in the Catalina foothills. Investigators pull up to a residential address approximately 4 miles from Nancy's home. Not a warehouse, not a storage unit, not a commercial property. The home of Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni, the same house where Nancy had dinner on the night of January 31st. The same house Tommaso drove away from at approximately 9:45 p.m. before dropping Nancy home for the last time. 3 days after her disappearance, law enforcement is inside that house with gloves on, photographing every surface, every room, every corner. That was the first search. There would be a second one 4 days later. Here is the legal framework that matters before anything else in this chapter. Both searches of Annie and Tommaso's home were conducted on a consent basis. Annie and Tommaso agreed to let investigators in without a warrant on both occasions. Attorney Jennifer Coffindaffer, a retired FBI special agent and former SWAT team member, made an important public assessment of what that means. Consent-based searches indicate investigators had not yet established probable cause. If they had probable cause, they would have obtained a warrant. They asked for permission instead. Coffindaffer stated clearly on record that she does not believe Annie or Tommaso are suspects, and that searching family-adjacent locations is standard investigative protocol in any high-profile abduction case. That counter-argument is legitimate. It is sourced. And it matters. But here is what happened on the night of the second search that goes beyond standard protocol in ways that multiple former law enforcement analysts have noted publicly. Saturday, February 7th, 2026, Day 7 of the investigation. Investigators arrive at Annie and Tommaso's home after sundown. They stay for nearly 3 hours, departing before midnight. From outside the property, reporters covering the case on the ground, including Fox News correspondent Sarah Rumpf-Witten and News Nation's Brian Enton, documented the search in real time. White flashes were visible from the street through the windows. Investigators photographing room after room, surface after surface. When deputies emerged from the home, they were wearing blue gloves and carrying brown evidence bags. Former CIA and FBI Special Agent Tracy Walder confirmed to People magazine that the brown bags visible in photographs taken outside the property were standard evidence containers, and the white case being carried by an agent was consistent with evidence processing tools. Then there was the badge. TMZ, covering the scene that evening, photographed one of the agents on site wearing a badge identifying him as a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, an ICAC designation. That detail drew immediate attention from former law enforcement analysts. ICAC investigators specialize in digital exploitation, online criminal networks, and device-based evidence. Their presence at a family home in a kidnapping case pointed investigators and analysts toward one specific question. What kind of digital evidence were they looking for? And the answer to that question appeared to be carried in a case over an agent's shoulder. TMZ identified the equipment as consistent with a Cellebrite Universal Forensic Extraction device. Former law enforcement analysts confirmed what that device does. It extracts data from smartphones, tablets, computers, and SIM cards, including content that has been deleted, encrypted, or deliberately concealed. Call logs, text messages, location history, application activity, photographs, data that most people believe disappears permanently the moment they erase it. The Cellebrite system can reach beneath those deletions and retrieve what was there before. Investigators were not just searching the house. They were pulling the digital record of every device inside it. And now here is the detail that former FBI Special Agent Brianna Fox raised publicly in the days following the second search. The timing of arrival, after sundown, before midnight, is entirely consistent with the deployment of luminol. Luminol is a chemical detection agent used in forensic investigations to identify trace amounts of biological material that is invisible to the naked eye. Material that may have been cleaned, painted over, or otherwise concealed. There is one critical operational requirement for luminol. It must be used in complete darkness. The investigators arrived after sunset. They left before midnight. They spent 3 hours inside. Fox was careful in her public assessment. She stated she would not assume deeper meaning from the timing alone, noting that the FBI photographs everything as standard protocol, and that thorough evidence collection is designed to eliminate doubt rather than assign it. But she confirmed the timing was consistent with that process. What happened the next morning adds another layer entirely. On February 8, 2026, drone footage captured investigators at Nancy's own property, probing the septic tank in the backyard using long metal poles. They also examined the manhole cover on the property. Fox 10 Phoenix reported this marked a clear shift in the investigative posture, from general evidence collection to precise forensic targeting of specific structures on the grounds. And then there was the tension that Reuters reported between federal and local investigators. Well, the FBI had requested that key physical evidence recovered from the scene, including DNA samples and a glove found near Nancy's home, be sent to the FBI's National Forensic Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for analysis. The glove recovered near the property was a significant lead. The FBI's Quantico Laboratory is where the most sensitive and complex forensic analysis in the country is conducted. Sending evidence there is not routine. It signals that whatever was recovered at that scene required a level of forensic processing that exceeds what local resources can provide. By the time both searches of Annie and Tommaso's home were complete, by the time the evidence bags had been logged and the Cellebrite extraction had been processed, investigators were sitting in front of screens glowing with recovered data. Deleted calls, erased messages, location timestamps, application histories, piecing together a digital portrait of the days and hours surrounding January 31st. What that data showed has not been disclosed publicly. But the FBI does not carry a forensic extraction device into a grieving family's home twice in 4 days for procedure alone. What the record shows is 2 consent-based searches in 4 days, an Internet Crimes Against Children agent on site, a forensic extraction device capable of recovering deleted content from every device in the house. An after-dark arrival consistent with luminol deployment. Evidence bags leaving the property in blue-gloved hands. DNA and a glove sent to Quantico. And the septic tank of Nancy's home probed with poles the following morning. That is what 48 hours of active evidence collection looked like in this investigation. And none of it happened in a vacuum. It happened while Savannah Guthrie was standing in front of a camera, making public appeals and choosing her words with the precision of someone who has spent a career understanding exactly what words do. What those words reveal, and what the 17 days between her February 7th statement and her February 24th appearance actually tell a trained behavioral analyst, is the piece of this case that changes the weight of everything collected inside that house. February 16th, 2026. 2 weeks after Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills. Sheriff Chris Nanos stands at a press podium and makes a definitive public statement. He says the family has been cleared, and he uses a specific phrase about the vehicles connected to the investigation. Processed vehicles, past tense. The language of something finished, something concluded, something already returned to the people it belonged to. The country hears it. The national press reports it. And the blue Honda CR-V that Tommaso Cioni used to drive Nancy Guthrie home on the night of January 31st is sitting in an evidence lot. It has not moved. 10 days after that press conference on February 26, 2026, CBS 5 reporter Brianna Whitney contacted the Pima County Sheriff's Department directly. She asked one question: what is the current status of the vehicle? The department's response was unambiguous. All we can say at this time is that the vehicle is still part of the investigation. Cleared on day 16. His car confirmed still in evidence on day 27. The Sheriff's Department never explained that gap. Not in any subsequent press conference, not in any issued statement. The word processed hung in the national conversation while the car sat untouched in law enforcement custody. By March 10, 2026, investigative reporter Dave Mack reported on Nancy Grace's Crime Stories podcast that the Honda CR-V was at an auto mechanic shop, still in the custody of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, not the Guthrie family, and was being physically reassembled after what Mack described as an exhaustive forensic search. The car had been taken apart, every panel, every surface, every compartment opened and examined before investigators were prepared to begin putting it back together. As of March 11, 2026, the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed to Parade magazine that the vehicle had still not been returned. A department spokesperson stated the process was ongoing and that there was no exact timeline for when the return would happen. Former Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Kriegier, speaking exclusively to Parade, explained the forensic scope of what investigators would have extracted from that vehicle. Fingerprints and DNA swabs from every surface inside and outside the car. And then the layer that most people overlook entirely: electronic evidence. Modern vehicles are not just machines. They are data collection systems, location history, speed logs, door sensor timestamps, system activity records tied to every function the car performed, every moment the doors opened or closed, every location the GPS system tracked, so every speed reading logged against a timestamp. Kriegier stated clearly that all of that data can be cross-referenced against the investigative timeline of January 31st, minute by minute. Kriegier also raised a possibility that retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer expanded on publicly. The car may not have been held solely because of what happened inside it. It may have been held because of what happened around it. Coffindaffer, appearing on News Nation and on her own YouTube channel, laid out the question investigators would have been asking from the beginning. Is it possible Nancy was tracked from Annie and Tommaso's house? Is it possible a tracking device was placed on that vehicle? Is it possible someone interfaced physically with the car at some point before or after January 31st and left forensic material behind? Alcoffendaffer was explicit that she does not believe Annie or Tommaso are suspects. She pointed directly to the consent-based nature of both home searches as her evidence. If investigators had probable cause, they would have used a warrant. They asked permission instead. That is the counter-argument. It is sourced, it is credible, and it belongs in this chapter alongside everything else. But here is what former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell said on The Megyn Kelly Show on February 27, 2026. You only retain a vehicle in evidence if it carries value for a potential trial. You do not hold a family member's car for over 30 days on procedure alone. Then James Fitzgerald, the retired FBI behavioral analyst, delivered the line that has not left the national conversation since. His words were precise. If I was completely innocent, but I would hire a lawyer by now and say, I want my car back. Tommaso Cioni has not made that demand publicly. Annie Guthrie has not made it publicly. And Savannah Guthrie, who is living in Tucson, who sees her sister regularly, who has been present in that city throughout the entire duration of this investigation. She knows whether that car has come back. She knows exactly how long it has been in custody. She knows what Fitzgerald said on national television. She knows what it sounded like to the country when those words landed. And she has stood in front of a camera every week and chosen not to address a single word of it. Now place this alongside one specific comparison. Luke Daly, the man the FBI raided on February 13, 2026, with a full tactical response. Vehicles, agents in full operational gear, a federal operation that reporters on the ground described as organized and precise. Luke Daly's vehicle was returned in approximately 2 weeks. Same investigation, same Pima County Sheriff's Department, same active federal case. The man who received the most operationally intense law enforcement response in the entire investigation had his vehicle returned faster than the family the sheriff publicly described as cleared. No one in law enforcement has explained that discrepancy on the record. What you are looking at in this chapter is not one anomaly. It is a sequence. A car physically disassembled and reassembled by investigators over 40 days. A public statement using past tense that did not match active present reality. A forensic scope that goes beyond routine processing, through panels, through electronic systems, through every surface that might carry a fingerprint, a fiber, a trace of biological material, or a digital timestamp that places someone somewhere at a specific moment on the night of January 31st. And a family that has not, in over 40 days, publicly asked for it back. Former SWAT Commander Krieger offered the most direct summary of what all of this means from an investigative standpoint. The investigator's job is to create a case that is as rock solid as possible and leaves as little doubt in a jury's mind. Maintaining chain of custody on important items is part of that. He used the word jury, not hypothetically, as the operational framework inside which this vehicle is being held. What is sitting in that evidence lot, still being processed, still being reassembled, is not just a car. It is a 40-day forensic record of everything that vehicle did, everywhere it went, and everyone who may have touched it. See, and when investigators are finished with it, when the chain of custody has been preserved and the data has been fully analyzed, whatever that car tells them will either close a door or open one that has been sitting ajar since 9:30 p.m. on January 31st, 2026. What Savannah Guthrie said on camera between February 7th and February 24th tells its own story, and a trained behavioral analyst heard it differently than the rest of the country did. 6 videos, 6 public appearances across 31 days. February 4th, February 7th, February 9th, February 14th, February 24th, and March 2nd, 2026. $1 million reward announced. $500,000 donated to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Weekly Instagram posts, interviews, public appeals directed specifically and deliberately at whoever took Nancy Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie put her grief on display for an entire nation. She suspended her broadcasting duties. She stepped away from NBC's coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics. She moved her life to Tucson and stood in front of a camera every single week because she believed, or needed the world to believe, that visibility was the most powerful tool she had left. Now, listen to what the words actually say, because a trained behavioral analyst does not hear grief the same way the rest of the country does. February 4th, 2026. 3 days after Nancy vanished, Savannah appears alongside Annie and Cameron, all 3 siblings together on camera. The language is measured and deliberate. They acknowledge reports of a ransom letter circulating in the media. They address the person responsible directly. They say the family is ready to talk. And then Savannah adds a specific qualifier. She says the family needs confirmation that Nancy is alive and being held before any further communication can happen. The words are precise. They are not the unstructured outpouring of someone in acute shock. They are the words of someone who has already consulted with law enforcement and is delivering a calibrated response to a developing ransom situation. February 5th, 2026. Cameron Guthrie appears alone. He addresses the kidnapper directly, saying the family has not yet heard from them through any private channel and is waiting for contact. He asks them to reach out. He says the family needs a way to communicate. That framing, "We have not heard from you, we need you to reach out," establishes publicly that as of February 5th, no confirmed private line of communication with whoever took Nancy had been established. February 7th, 2026. All 3 siblings together again, holding hands. This time, the language shifts significantly. Savannah looks directly into the camera and says, "We received your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay." 3 days earlier, the family needed proof of life before engaging. By February 7th, they are acknowledging they received a message, and they are committing to payment. The shift between those 2 appearances represents a development in the ransom communication that occurred between February 4th and February 7th. The message they referenced was the same ransom communication the FBI and Sheriff's Department confirmed they were studying, according to a source familiar with the investigation. And critically, the ransom demand sent to CNN affiliates KOLD and KGUN had specified a deadline of February 9th and demanded $6 million in Bitcoin. Now read that February 7th statement again from a purely linguistic standpoint. We will pay. Present tense. Active. Unconditional. Directed at whoever holds Nancy. This is not eulogy language. This is not grief processing language. This is ransom engagement language. And Annie is standing right beside Savannah when those words are spoken. All 3 siblings unified in a single message. Bring Nancy home, and money will change hands. February 9th, 2026. The first deadline passes. Savannah appears alone for the first time. No Annie, no Cameron. The language moves. She tells the public she believes her mother is still out there. She says the family is at an hour of desperation. She asks anyone who has seen anything heard anything, noticed anything unusual to contact law enforcement immediately. The audience has expanded. She is no longer speaking exclusively to whoever took Nancy. She is now speaking to the general public. The communication posture has shifted from closed-channel ransom engagement to open broadcast public appeal. February 14th, February 18th. The appeals continue. The language holds a consistent register of active engagement. We believe. We are searching. We are asking. The framing remains in the present tense. The family is still operating on the premise that Nancy is alive, and that whoever has her can be reached. Then, February 24th, 2026, 17 days after the "we will pay" statement. Savannah is alone again. No Annie. No Cameron. And what comes out of her mouth does not sound like any of the previous 5 appearances. She says the family still believes in a miracle. She says hope against hope. She attributes a phrase to Annie. As my sister says, we are blowing on the embers of hope. And then she says this: she may already be gone. She may have already gone home to the Lord that she loves, and is dancing in heaven with her mom and her dad, and with her beloved brother Pierce, and with our daddy. Sit with that for a moment. We will pay on February 7th. She may already be gone on February 24th. Those are not variations of the same message. Those are 2 fundamentally different linguistic registers separated by 17 days. The first is ransom engagement language, active, present tense, directed at the kidnapper, are premised entirely on Nancy being alive and recoverable. The second is grief acceptance language, past tense imagery, heaven, reunion with deceased family members, and acknowledgement of the possibility that Nancy is no longer living. These are not the same emotional register. They are not the same communicative intent. And no confirmed development in the public record between February 7th and February 24th explains what changed Savannah's framing that dramatically. A former CNN FBI analyst made a point worth noting here. The fact that Savannah's February 7th payment commitment was made publicly on Instagram rather than through a private channel indicates that as of that date, no secured private line of communication with the kidnapper had been established. If a private channel existed, the response would be handled covertly and not broadcast to millions, which means every video Savannah made was being watched by the kidnapper on the same screen as the rest of the country. Every word chosen, every tone calibrated, every appearance constructed with the full knowledge that the person who took Nancy was watching too. And there is one more detail that sits beneath all of this and has not received the attention it deserves. At the time of each of Savannah's public appearances, she was in Tucson. She was seeing Annie regularly. She knew what the FBI had taken out of Annie's home in those brown evidence bags. She knew the car was still in the evidence lot. She knew what investigators were looking at. And every word she spoke on camera was chosen with that knowledge sitting in the room with her. Now here is what behavioral analysts examine when they study these video patterns. They do not just look at what is said. They look at who is present and who is absent. They look at when the language shifts and what changed in the investigative record in the days immediately preceding that shift. They look at the gap between public posture and private knowledge. And in those 6 videos, laid side by side, they see something the country largely heard but did not truly process. Savannah Guthrie is not just a grieving daughter making desperate appeals. She is a woman of extraordinary professional communication skill, trained to choose words with precision, who has been standing in front of a camera for 31 days, knowing things she has not said. What the trained analyst heard when he watched all 6 of those videos is what this entire chapter has been building toward. And what he did next The question he asked publicly on national television after watching the last one is the detail that makes everything in this investigation land differently. February 4th, 2026. Annie Guthrie sits beside her siblings on camera. She is present. She speaks. She holds Savannah's hand. 3 days after their mother vanished from a brick house 4 miles from Annie's front door, she faces the lens and participates in the family's first public appeal. 4 days later, on February 7th, she is there again, standing beside Savannah, holding hands, present for the "We Will Pay" statement that the entire country watched. And then Annie Guthrie disappears from public view for 22 consecutive days. Not a brief pause, not a short absence, 22 days. While the FBI searched her home twice in 4 days, while the Celebrite device extracted data from the devices inside her house, while the car sat in an evidence lot, and while the country watched and waited, and the tip lines filled with over 30,000 calls. Through all of it, Annie Guthrie said nothing publicly. Not one statement, not one camera appearance, not one post. 22 days of complete and unbroken silence. The last known person to see Nancy alive is Tommaso Cioni. The last place Nancy was before she went home that night was Annie's house. And the woman at the center of both of those facts went silent for 3 weeks, while a federal investigation consumed her home, her husband's vehicle, and the devices on her kitchen counter. Before any analysis of that silence, the legitimate counter-arguments belong in this chapter fully and clearly. Annie Guthrie is not a public figure. She has spent her adult life deliberately outside the spotlight. She is a poet and an author. She and Tommaso, who is an Italian-born musician and science teacher, have maintained a private life by design. She has no media training, no public platform, no practiced relationship with cameras and press conferences. Savannah does. Annie does not. And in a high-profile federal investigation, the standard legal counsel given to any family member in proximity to an active case is unambiguous. Do not speak publicly. Let law enforcement work. Say nothing that can be taken out of context, misquoted, or used against the investigation. If Annie received that advice, and there is every reason to believe she did, then her silence is not suspicious. It is rational. It is exactly what a competent attorney would tell her to do. All of that is true, verified, and it matters. But here is what behavioral analysts examine in abduction cases specifically. They look at the absence of behavior alongside the presence of it. And in cases involving elderly victims taken from their homes, cases with ransom demands, cases where the victim is alive and recoverable, the behavioral baseline shows that the people closest to the victim typically become the most publicly visible advocates. They hold press conferences. They beg on camera. They speak directly to the kidnapper by name if they can. They make themselves visible because visibility feels like action when action is the only thing they have left. It is not a universal law. It is a documented pattern. And in this case, one sibling follows that pattern with extraordinary precision. The other does not. Savannah Guthrie is a television professional. She knows how cameras work. She knows how words land. She knows what public grief looks like when it is effective, and what it looks like when it falls flat. So her 6 appearances are not simply emotional. They are strategic, deliberate, and constructed. That is not a criticism. That is a description of competence in a moment of crisis. But it also means that when you look at the contrast between Savannah's 6 appearances and Annie's 22 days of silence, you are not looking at a simple difference in personality. You are looking at a deliberate choice made by someone who knew, from the moment her mother was reported missing, that she was not just a grieving daughter. She was a family member whose home had been searched by the FBI twice in 4 days. On March 2nd, 2026, Annie re-emerged publicly for the first time since February 7th. She appeared alongside Savannah and Tommaso at a makeshift tribute outside Nancy's home. The three of them placed yellow flowers at the edge of the property. Savannah posted a photograph to Instagram. No statement from Annie. No words on camera. A physical presence, but a continued verbal silence. And then Fox News Digital captured footage of that moment. Savannah, Annie, and Tommaso standing together at the tribute. And that footage became the most analyzed image of the entire case in the week that followed. Because standing there, at the edge of his mother-in-law's property, was Tommaso Cioni, the last person to see Nancy alive, the man whose car had been held in evidence for over 30 days, the man whose home had been searched twice in 4 days with a forensic extraction device. So standing at a tribute to the woman he last saw alive, beside the wife who had not spoken publicly in 22 days, beside the sister-in-law who had spoken 6 times in 31 days and chosen every word with professional precision. By March 10, 2026, Annie and Cameron were seen making a brief visit to Nancy's property. Still no public statement from Annie. Still no camera appearance. Still no direct address to the kidnapper, the public, or the investigators who had spent weeks inside her home. What does a behavioral analyst do with 22 days of silence from a woman whose mother is missing, whose home has been searched by the FBI, and whose husband was the last person to see that mother alive? The answer is not to treat silence as a confession. The answer, as James Fitzgerald demonstrated on national television, is to treat it as data. Data that sits alongside 6 videos made by a sister who lives in the same city, sees the same evidence, and has access to the same information. Data that, when placed beside the car timeline, the 2 searches, and the forensic extraction, tells a story that the national press largely described but never fully assembled. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. What time is it there? What is the weather like? And I want to know this specifically. Does Annie's 22 days of silence read differently to you now than it did before this video started? Because what is coming next is the detail that a 30-year FBI veteran walked away from 6 videos talking about. And it is the piece that ties Annie's silence directly to Savannah's words. Both of them point in the same direction. See, and that direction has a name. 30 years. That is how long James Fitzgerald spent inside the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. 30 years in the rooms where the worst cases land. The cases that do not get solved with fingerprints or security footage. The cases that get solved by reading human behavior. The words people choose, the patterns they repeat, the silences they construct around themselves when they are under pressure. Fitzgerald is the investigator whose forensic linguistic work helped crack the Unabomber case in the 1990s. Not through DNA, not through a tip, not through surveillance footage, but by reading the manifesto of Ted Kaczynski and identifying the precise patterns of language that pointed to a specific kind of mind. That is the lens Fitzgerald brought to 6 videos of a grieving daughter. And when he was done, he did not talk about the masked man on the doorbell camera. He and his colleague, retired FBI Special Agent Raymond Carr, have been publicly analyzing the Nancy Guthrie case through their Code Red podcast and through multiple national television appearances since early February 2026. Together, Fitzgerald and Carr built a behavioral profile of the masked suspect, a profile that identified what Carr described as fantasy-driven behavior. Someone who, Carr assessed, would have conducted extensive prior online research into methods of physical control and surveillance. Someone who would have executed multiple dry runs along routes to the target property before the night of January 31st. Someone whose reconnaissance was not passive but active, physical, and repeated. That profile matched the confirmed CNN reporting about the suspect's prior visit to Nancy's property on a separate earlier date. But what Fitzgerald focused on publicly was not the suspect's profile. It was the family's behavior. On the Megyn Kelly Show on February 27, 2026, Fitzgerald made an assessment that immediately became the most analyzed statement in the entire national conversation about this case. Speaking specifically about the vehicle that Tommaso Cioni had used to drive Nancy home on the night of January 31st, a vehicle that had been in the Pima County Sheriff's Department's evidence custody for over 30 days at that point. Fitzgerald was direct. His words were precise. "If I was completely innocent, I would hire a lawyer by now and say, 'I want my car back.'" Then he went further. He raised the question, in the context of everything he had observed from Savannah's 6 videos and the family's overall public posture, of whether Savannah Guthrie harbors her own private suspicions about her sister Annie. Pause on what it takes to arrive at that question publicly. This is not a social media commentator. This is not a podcast host speculating from a distance. This is a man who spent 3 decades inside the FBI's most specialized behavioral unit. A man who has sat across from subjects in interrogation rooms that most people will never see the inside of. A man whose professional reputation is built entirely on the accuracy of his behavioral reads. And after watching 6 videos of a grieving daughter, the same 6 videos the entire country watched, the question he walked away with was not about the masked man on the porch, and it was about the family dynamic between 2 sisters. Fitzgerald made clear he was not making an accusation. His comments were analytical, rooted in the behavioral patterns he observed across all 6 appearances. What he identified was a gap between what Savannah knows, as confirmed by her proximity to Annie, her presence in Tucson throughout the investigation, her access to everything the FBI has been doing 4 miles from her sister's front door, and what Savannah has chosen to say on camera. 6 appearances, 31 days. Carefully chosen words every single time, and not once in any of those appearances has Savannah addressed the car, the 2 searches, the Celebrite extraction, or the forensic scope of what investigators pulled from her sister's home. Fitzgerald is not alone in his behavioral assessment of this case. The former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole told CNN that she was surprised the Pima County Sheriff's Department publicly acknowledged having no suspects or persons of interest so early in the investigation. She argued that maintaining investigative pressure on potential perpetrators is critical, that removing that pressure publicly can prompt subjects to relax, stop making the observable behavioral errors that investigators are watching for. O'Toole also made a significant observation about the masked suspect himself. She noted his ability to adjust quickly to changing surroundings, specifically his response when he noticed the doorbell camera. His calm, she said, comes from only 2 things: personality and experience in situations like this before. Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong added a clinical assessment to the behavioral picture from the suspect's side. Speaking to CNN, DeLong described the likely psychological profile of whoever planned and executed this operation as someone with an extreme level of confidence in their own abilities. Someone who does not perceive themselves as fallible. Someone whose planning was not born of desperation, but of calculated certainty. DeLong noted that for someone to believe they could execute an operation of this complexity, engineering a surveillance blackout, conducting prior reconnaissance, physically removing an 84-year-old woman from her home in the middle of the night, the level of narcissistic confidence required is not ordinary. which brings the behavioral analysis back to Fitzgerald's central observation. So the planning required for this operation demanded inside information, knowledge of the property, knowledge of the schedule, knowledge of the cameras, knowledge of the specific window of hours when Nancy would be home and alone. That level of operational intelligence does not come from public sources. It comes from proximity. And the question Fitzgerald sat with after watching those 6 videos, the question he raised publicly on national television, is about who in this family's inner circle possessed that proximity. And whether Savannah Guthrie, standing in front of those cameras week after week, choosing every word with professional precision, already knows the answer. Fitzgerald also noted the behavioral indicators that investigators would be watching for in anyone close to this case: observable mental strain, on changes in sleep patterns, a tendency toward over-explaining whereabouts or constructing unsolicited alibis, hypervigilance around law enforcement activity, and most pointedly, the absence of a demand for the return of a vehicle that has been sitting in an evidence lot for over 40 days. He said clearly, the car detail matters, not because it is conclusive, because of what the absence of a demand tells a trained behavioral analyst about the psychology of the person who should be demanding it. That is the profiler's question, not an accusation, not a conclusion, a behavioral read from the most credentialed analytical lens that has been applied to this case. 7 verified details, all on the record, and this is the one that ties the other 6 together. Because Fitzgerald did not arrive at that question by accident. He arrived at it by watching 6 videos, reading the language inside them, measuring what was said against what was not said, and applying 30 years of behavioral science to the gap between those 2 things. What the premeditation evidence shows, the digital trail that existed months before January 31st, 2026, closes that gap even further. January 11th, 2026. 3 weeks before Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills. Investigators examining the digital trail around this case later identified what appears to be search activity for Nancy Guthrie's specific home address originating from within Arizona. That date, January 11th, surfaced independently in a second place. A message posted to the Ring Camera Neighborhood app on February 12th, confirmed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department as legitimate. He specifically requested that neighbors check their security footage from between 9 p.m. and midnight on January 11th. The same date appearing in 2 separate investigative threads, digital search data, and a targeted camera request, is not coincidence. It is a data point, and it sits inside a much longer premeditation timeline that begins not in January, but in the summer of 2025. Fox News Digital, using publicly available Google Trends data, identified what appears to be search activity for Nancy Guthrie's Catalina foothills address between June 21st and 28th, 2025, more than 7 months before she was taken. A Google spokesperson responded to the findings with a caveat. Google Trends is designed for understanding large data sets, and for topics with low search volumes, the tool can mix in random noise to protect user privacy. So a spike for an uncommon topic is not definitive evidence that a search occurred. A source familiar with the investigation told Fox News Digital that law enforcement would use subpoenas and investigative tools, not publicly available marketing data, to access actual search records. What Fox News surfaced is directional, not conclusive, but the date it points to, January 11th, is conclusive in one specific regard. It is the same date investigators independently flagged when requesting surveillance footage from Nancy's neighborhood. Fox News Digital also identified what appears to be search activity for Savannah Guthrie's salary between December 13th and 20th, 2025. $6 million. That is the figure the ransom demand sent to Tucson television stations KOLD and KGUN specified. A former FBI profiler, Raymond Carr, made the connection publicly. Whoever sent that demand had a working knowledge of what Savannah Guthrie earns. They had done research. They had a number in mind before they ever sent a letter. And that number was calibrated specifically to what a daughter of Savannah's professional standing could plausibly access or raise. The physical premeditation evidence adds another layer entirely. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek that the masked suspect's behavior on the recovered doorbell footage confirmed a level of prior knowledge that goes beyond what surveillance from a distance could provide. He walked straight toward the camera with his head down. No hesitation. No searching for the device. He knew exactly where it was. The Coffindaffer's assessment was direct. It makes no sense to me that this was not completely targeted. The suspect did not discover the camera when he arrived. He already knew it was there, and investigators confirmed what that means about his prior visits. The same individual appeared at Nancy's front door on a separate occasion before January 31st. No backpack on that visit. Same approach path, same familiarity with the property. Former FBI Special Agent Brianna Fox, speaking on the Today Show, assessed the suspect as falling into a specific behavioral category. Premeditated, but not fully thought through. She noted the image showing him without a backpack and a later image showing him carrying one, and assessed that behaviorally, the suspect likely has a significant ego. Someone who believed the plan was solid. And someone who planned for the camera but did not plan for Google's back-end servers retaining residual footage from a disconnected device. The utility box around the corner from Nancy's home added a physical dimension to the digital picture. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed to multiple outlets that a damaged utility box located near Nancy's street was part of the active investigation. Infrastructure damage of that kind, at the corner of the street where the targeted property sits, is consistent with an attempt to interfere with connectivity in the surrounding area before or during the operation. Investigators have not publicly confirmed whether the damage was caused by the suspect, but its inclusion in the active evidence gathering is documented and confirmed. And the FBI's investigative reach in this case extended significantly beyond Tucson. Sheriff Nanos confirmed to reporters that investigators had been in contact with Mexican authorities, a coordination consistent with the geographic reality of the case. Tucson sits approximately 60 miles north of the Mexican border. Rio Rico, where delivery driver Carlos Palazuelos was detained on February 10th during a traffic stop and later released without charges, is located directly in that corridor. The FBI's operational command structure shifted from Tucson to Phoenix during the investigation. Described publicly as a reallocation of resources, field offices in Phoenix carry significantly greater analytical and logistical capacity than local field presence. And that shift signals a case that had expanded in scope beyond its original geographic footprint. The FBI also recovered additional photographs from 3 cameras positioned at Nancy's property: a pool camera, a backyard camera, and a side yard camera. All 3 cameras captured images of people in the yard area during an unspecified time period before the abduction. Investigators confirmed nothing in those images appeared suspicious, but the fact that those cameras were capturing motion, that people had been in Nancy's yard and in the areas around her property in the days and weeks before January 31st, was logged as part of the forensic record. Now here is what the full premeditation picture assembles into. Potential address searches in June 2025. Potential salary searches in December 2025. A targeted camera request for January 11th, 2026. A prior in-person reconnaissance visit to Nancy's front door before the night of the abduction, a damaged utility box on her street, a ransom demand calibrated to a specific dollar figure consistent with Savannah's known earnings, an operation that required a masked individual, gloves, a specifically sourced backpack, and a plan for neutralizing the camera at the door. Sheriff Nanos told NBC Nightly News something that has not received the attention it deserves. He said investigators believe they know why Nancy Guthrie's home was specifically targeted. He did not say who provided the information that made targeting it possible. He did not say whether that information came from public sources or private ones. He said they know why. And then he added something else. He did not rule out the possibility that whoever is responsible could strike again. That statement from the sheriff of Pima County, the man running the ground-level investigation, is the sharpest edge in this entire chapter, because it implies that whoever planned this is not finished, that the level of confidence and preparation that went into January 31st was not a one-time event born of desperation. It was the product of a methodology, a process, and a supply of information about targets that does not expire with a single operation. 7 details, all verified, all on the record, and when laid side by side in chronological order, they build a picture that points in one specific direction. What that picture means, what the full evidence record assembled across 45 days of federal investigation actually concludes, is what the final chapter of tonight's video is built around. Day 46. Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 46 days. No arrests, no named suspect, no confirmed sighting. Over 18,000 tips processed through the FBI's 24-hour command post and the Pima County Sheriff's tip line. A combined reward of $1.2 million still active and unclaimed. And the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirming as recently as March 13th that it continues to analyze evidence. Laboratory materials, camera images, digital data, with no public timeline for resolution. The search is still open. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. And the 7 details this video has assembled across the last 9 chapters have not been answered by anyone standing at a podium. Here is what the verified record actually says. All of it, side by side. Detail 1. That Tommaso Cioni was the last person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. He drove her home from Annie's house on the night of Saturday, January 31st, 2026. He watched the garage door close at 9:30 p.m. He drove away. That answer has not changed once across 46 days of active federal investigation. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed Tommaso ensured Nancy was safely inside before he left. The sheriff also confirmed, in a formal public statement, that the entire Guthrie family, including all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects. His words were direct. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious, and are victims in this case. That clearance is on the record. It belongs in this chapter, alongside everything else. Detail 2. The neighborhood cameras went dark the night Nancy vanished. The multiple Ring devices across several properties showed gaps in their recording history during the precise overnight window of the disappearance. A damaged utility box around the corner from Nancy's home was confirmed by the Sheriff's Department as part of the active investigation. Forensic experts assessed the outage as requiring either a professional-grade signal-disrupting device or deliberate interference with local infrastructure. The FBI confirmed both January 11th and January 24th as dates of potential prior surveillance activity. Neighbors were specifically asked for footage from those dates. The masked suspect had visited Nancy's property at least once before January 31st. This operation was planned. That is not a theory. That is the investigative conclusion of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI. It's confirmed publicly by Sheriff Nanos when he stated the attack was targeted. Detail 3. The FBI searched Annie and Tommaso's home twice in 4 days, February 4th and February 7th. The second search occurred after dark, with agents arriving after sunset and departing before midnight, a timing consistent with forensic chemical detection protocols requiring complete darkness. A forensic extraction device was brought into the home on the second visit, capable of recovering deleted calls, messages, location data, and application activity from every device inside. Agents left carrying brown evidence bags in blue gloves. Former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder confirmed those bags were standard evidence containers. An Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force agent was documented on site, and both searches were consent-based, a fact attorney Jennifer Coffindaffer used to support her assessment that Annie and Tommaso are not suspects. If investigators had probable cause, they would have used a warrant. That counter-argument is verified, and it stands. Detail 4. The Honda CR-V Tommaso used to drive Nancy home was seized and placed into evidence. On February 16th, Sheriff Nanos used the phrase "processed vehicles" in the past tense at a press podium. On February 26th, the Sheriff's Department confirmed to CBS 5 that the vehicle was still part of the investigation. Cleared on day 16. Car still in custody on day 27. A forensic reconstruction of the vehicle was underway as of March 10th. Panels removed, every surface examined, electronic data extracted including location history, door sensor timestamps, and speed logs. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell stated publicly that vehicles are only retained in evidence if they carry trial value. James Fitzgerald stated publicly that an innocent person would have demanded the car back by now. No public demand was ever made. The Sheriff's Department confirmed, as of March 11th, there was no exact timeline for the vehicle's return. Detail 5. All family members, including Annie and Tommaso, have now passed polygraph examinations. That development, confirmed by multiple sources as of March 17, 2026, is the most significant exculpatory data point in this chapter. Polygraph results are not admissible in court and are not conclusive indicators of truth, but their administration signals something specific about the investigative posture of both the FBI and the Sheriff's Department. How they were given, they were passed. And the Sheriff's public clearance of the family was not a casual press conference remark. It was a deliberate, formal statement issued in direct response to national media speculation. Detail 6. Savannah's language shifted between February 7th and February 24th in ways a trained behavioral analyst identified as significant. "We will pay on February 7th. She may already be gone on February 24th. Ransom engagement language converted into grief acceptance language in 17 days, with no publicly confirmed development in the case explaining that shift. Annie disappeared from public view for 22 consecutive days between February 7th and March 1st. And the behavioral baseline in abduction cases involving elderly victims shows family members closest to the victim typically become the most publicly vocal advocates. Savannah follows that pattern precisely. Annie, by every documented measure of the public record, does not. Legitimate legal counsel explains that gap. Behavioral analysts note it regardless. Detail 7. James Fitzgerald, 30 years inside the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the investigator whose forensic linguistic work helped identify Ted Kaczynski, watched 6 videos of a grieving daughter, and when the last video ended, he raised the question publicly on national television of whether Savannah Guthrie harbors her own private suspicions about her sister Annie. He made no accusation. His assessment was analytical, and rooted in the behavioral gap between what Savannah demonstrably knows and what she has chosen to say on camera across 31 days of public appearances. That question, from that source, after that level of analysis, is not noise. It is the most credentialed behavioral read that has been applied to this case by anyone operating outside active law enforcement. Now, here is what the full record says when all 7 details are assembled together. A targeted operation, pre-planned, executed with prior reconnaissance. A forensic trail that moved from Nancy's front porch to her son-in-law's driveway, to her daughter's home, to an evidence lot where a car sat for over 40 days. A behavioral trail that moved from 6 videos of a grieving daughter to a profiler's question about the sister who said nothing for 3 weeks. And an investigative trail that expanded from Tucson to Phoenix to federal resources, to a billboard campaign spanning Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California, to coordination with Mexican authorities, to 18,000 tips, and a combined reward of $1.2 million still unclaimed. Sheriff Nanos told NBC he believes investigators are definitely closer to identifying a suspect. A forensic genealogist has publicly assessed that the suspect's DNA may still be recoverable at the scene. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed on March 13th it continues to analyze laboratory evidence. The FBI's billboard campaign is active across 7 major cities. And as of today, March 18th, 2026, no one has been arrested. Nancy Guthrie is someone's mother, someone's grandmother. An 84-year-old woman of deep faith who has been without her daily cardiac medication for 46 days. She deserves to be found. She deserves to come home. If you have any information about this case, contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can also submit tips directly at tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 52035149000. A combined reward of $1.2 million is active for information leading to Nancy's recovery or an arrest. Every tip is reviewed. Every lead is followed. Your information could be the one that matters. If this video gave you something the national coverage missed, share it right now. Not for the numbers. Because Nancy Guthrie's name needs to stay in circulation until she is found. So every share keeps this case in front of someone who might have a piece of the puzzle that investigators have not yet reached. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because when this case breaks, and it will break, this channel will be the first place the full forensic record gets assembled the same way tonight's video assembled it. You do not want to miss that. The comments are open. Tell me where you watched from tonight. Tell me which detail landed hardest. And tell me what you think the record is pointing toward. Every comment gets read. Every one. Nancy Guthrie. Still missing. Day 46. The investigation is active. The reward is unclaimed. And somewhere in the verified record this video just laid out, the answer is already there.